Matt Dalgleish at Thomas Elder Markets. Thanks for joining us again on Flow, Matt.
No problems with you. Always good to be on.
Yep, we're back. Hit our straps back into it for 2022. How are things looking? We'll start with the cattle market as well. The Eastern Young Cattle Indicator seems to have sort of settled down at around 1,100. Still an excellent price, but how are things moving with the processing side and slaughter?
Yeah, that's right. We did see an initial jump in the Eastern Young Cattle Indicator early January, but towards the end of January there was quite a few supply side issues with processors having problems with workforce, and that got a little bit of market got a bit spooked, I think, from that, and we saw a bit of a fall coming into the latter part of January. So Eki down to about 11.20 at the moment, and it's been going sideways the last week or so.
Yeah, sideways and pretty stable really, but still way up on what it was the year before, still at these record levels.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, historically very strong.
Yep, and you've got some articles on the Thomas Elder Markets website just talking across the beef and the sheep sectors about what's happening with processing. Just run us through some of that.
January we saw quite a few complications around the spread of Omicron within processing, particularly in the southern states, southeastern part of the country, South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, where quite a few processors were reporting reduced workforce, between 30 to 50% of staff not coming in because they'd contracted COVID, and also some difficulty in getting access to rapid antigen tests so that they could do the test and then prove they were good to come back again. So workforce reductions between 30 to 50% was noted. So that meant there was quite low slaughter volumes through January, very very much lower than normal, and that took a bit of a sting out of the market with those processor buyers not being there. That the prices started to soften, particularly for lamb and sheep.
Yeah, I noticed that apart from one little hiccup in early November, we're now just recently hit on the National Trade Lamb Indicator 8.24 cents as of Thursday night, so back down to sort of June levels last year. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and I think if you compare now, we're slightly lower than that. So this week we saw some more further falls. I don't think the processors are completely out of the woods yet in terms of getting back on track. And there's been an increase to lambs now that we're well and truly past the Australia Day, long week, the holiday midweek there for Australia Day. We had a few sale yards out of action, but numbers at the sale yard are starting to increase again, so that's putting a bit of price pressure on, particularly for a couple of categories of lambs.
Yeah, it was expected at some stage those volumes would come back once people were confident there would be buyers there at the yards.
Yeah, that's right, and it looks like that's what we're seeing now into early February, that the numbers, particularly for lamb, sheep yardings, I think are still a bit on the low side, but that could also be just because there's still low supply and incentive to rebuild and hold on to some of those older kind of sheep for another extra year or so just to build the numbers. But yeah, certainly lambs are getting back to pretty close to normal levels for February.
Yeah, speaking of rebuild, Meat and Livestock Australia in the last week or so put a projection out there about where their rebuild was going, and there's some export numbers around as well.
Yeah, that's right. So MLA have put out their February forecast for the cattle industry, their initial forecast now for this coming season and into the next few years. And the interesting point there was that while they're still looking at the rebuild continuing, they've kind of pared back the pace of the rebuild. So originally, late last year, they were talking the cattle herd getting above 28 million head by 2023, and they've pushed that back now. So they're thinking it's going to be a bit slower rebuild. Still rebuilding, but we're not going to get above 28 million head now until 2024 is what the expectation is from MLA.
Just offhand, that rebuild number, I think last time I spoke with MLA, that's still some way short of sort of records in terms of the total capacity Australia's held in the past.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's getting up more towards a kind of normalised levels, say over the last decade or so. But if you go back prior to that, then we did see numbers into the 30 million. So there's a little bit still left to go, but it's a matter of how long we've got with this good season. And obviously we all know what happens to the cattle market when we get a couple of dry seasons. It doesn't take much to turn back into a liquidation phase.
Yeah, and lastly, some export numbers have come out as well about how things are looking for those that are exporting live cattle, I imagine, but also some refrigerated meat as well.
Yeah, that's right. So the January figures came out for beef, and they were the lowest volumes in a January for about 10 years in terms of total, all destinations. And the key one that was quite soft was our number one destination, Japan. They had the lowest January figures for since 2002. So significantly lower in January for Japan. which was a bit of a concern, but we did have South Korea as strong as ever. They were doing very well and only about 1% under the 5-year trend, so strong numbers considering our prices and our supply for South Korea. But they've had really good demand for the last probably nearly 2 years now coming out of Australia, which is positive that our markets there are diverse enough to withstand these kind of ups and downs when you see something like Japan coming off. China was about 20% below 5-year trend, which again, considering that we've got 10 abattoirs now that have got difficulty getting access to China, the fact that we're only 20% behind the 5-year trend is probably not a bad result. And the USA is the kind of next one in terms of the 4 top destinations, but they're starting equally as soft as what we saw in 2021, and they're about 45% below trend. So very, very weak demand out of the US, but they're going through a stage of their own liquidation over there. So they've got quite a lot of product being slaughtered and fairly high supplies and lower pricing than what we've got, so it probably makes sense that they're using their domestic stuff rather than importing.
It's just on that front, actually, you mentioned we're jumping across sheep and as the beef front from time to time here as we talk about it, but I picked up from the southeast down at Narracourt, the local processor there, they've been banned by China. What's going on here with China and getting our product into there from our processors?
Yeah, that's right. So that was the processor there had an outbreak of COVID, so and they had issues. Obviously, they had those staffing issues I mentioned before. They were one of those, had those processing issues, and they got it was about 130 staff in the end that contracted COVID, and they ended up shutting down for the week. And so we saw for that week, actually, normally that's the main beef processor in South Australia as well, that Narracourt facility. So for that week, I think the normal kind of volumes would have been about 4,000 head of cattle processed per week in that facility. It went down to about 100 head for the state, which is quite a soft week. And then on the back of that issue there, the Chinese government decided to enact a ban, and they've been quite sensitive, the Chinese authorities, and not just within Australia but also in other countries when there's been outbreaks of COVID. They've been quick to restrict volumes particularly of chilled and frozen product of meat because they've got concerns that they believe COVID can last on the product, and they're scared that it's going to be coming into the country on the product. I don't think there's been any proof that that's occurring, but that's certainly the concerns from the Chinese.
Well, I think when there was a debate about the origins of COVID-19, the Chinese initially claimed that it had come into their country from imports, but I guess they're trying to just be consistent with their argument, let's put it that way.
Yeah, look, that's correct. And I know there's been some trade concerns around not just beef but other products from Australia. I think that's probably playing into the political side, but this kind of behaviour to ban volumes into the country because of COVID concerns isn't just targeted at Australia. They have done the same to the likes of Brazil and Germany and elsewhere.
Just lastly, because you're probably someone who knows far better than most, Argentina had a little concern of their own about an illness within their own cattle. Has that been resolved, or is it still sort of an issue for them?
They had a bit of an issue with the BSE outbreak, but the nature of the outbreak was not. It's not the same variation of BSE that caused such problems in the UK. It's an atypical case, so it tends to be less problematic. But any time there's an outbreak of BSE, there is kind of a level of concern, just given what happened to the UK all those years ago. And you've seen, that Brazil has had similar type scenarios of outbreaks of atypical BSE. I think there was one in Canada as well, just recently. So they come up from time to time, but generally they're older animals, and it's not those types that are easily spread, that particular type of disease.
Well, Matt, thanks very much. Comprehensive wrap across beef and sheep as well. Much appreciated for your time. And where can people get the latest from Thomas Elder Markets?
Just go to the website, thomaseldermarkets.com.au, or you can follow us on Twitter if that's your preference. It's at TE Markets on Twitter.